Welcome to the Prime Health Podcast with your host, Dr. Derek Barron. Dr. Barron interviews doctors, wellness experts, and healthcare leaders who are revolutionizing how we approach health and longevity. The Prime Health Podcast explores breakthrough science, personal and patient stories, and practical insights that are shaping the future of health and wellness. So sit back, listen in, and prepare to transform how you think about your path towards Prime Health with Dr. Barron and his special guest.
Welcome back to the Prime Health Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Derek Barron, and I'm here to bring you cutting-edge insights and practical strategies from leading healthcare experts for your journey to Prime Health in life and in business. So here's a question I want you to consider. Everyone's talking about living longer, but our guest today, Kat Fu of the Longevity Vault, wants you to consider that maybe your sleep, not your diet or workouts, is the biggest thing quietly aging you faster. And I know we're going to learn more about that from her. But just before we jump in this episode with Kat, I have a quick message from our sponsor, Growth Solutions. We are your growth partner that turns healthcare expertise into market leadership, one strategic move at a time. Growth Solutions is not an agency or vendor. We are your growth partner, and we take diagnostic approaches to your business. We analyze where time, money, leads, or opportunities may be leaking. We help eliminate stressors in business such as new patient or client acquisitions, marketing and growth strategies, reducing operational chaos with proven systems, frameworks, and SOPs. And yes, we help you understand the AI and the AI bots because those robots are coming for us whether we like it or not. So if you've ever thought this to yourself, I'm too busy to grow, too slow to scale, or too overwhelmed to fix it, we could be your solution. So if you're interested, you can just drop the word free in below in the comments, and we'll have one of our staff members reach out to set up a complimentary consultation to talk with you about how things can happen for you in your business. But you came here for today, and that's to learn from our amazing guest, Kat. So Kat, welcome to the Prime Health Podcast, and please tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Hi, Derek. Thanks for having me. The problem is that most sleep advice is not only incomplete, but it's also not personalized. There is a lot more involved in sleep physiology than a consistent bedtime melatonin and avoid blue light, as we will discuss more today. I run the Longevity Vault, where I publish research-driven, actionable content for high-agency adults who want to protect their brain, their energy, and their longevity. And I've helped clients in the US, Europe, and beyond get back sleep that most of them had thought was just a part of getting older. I'm Kat Fu. I hold 2 master's degrees, including one in biomechanical engineering from Stanford University. I have been in health optimization since 2007. My focus is on sleep and longevity and sleep for longevity, specifically in men and women over 50. So Derek, thanks again for having me today, and I am looking forward to chatting about sleep and helping more individuals overcome 3 a.m. wake-ups so they can get the restful sleep they want and have the energy they want to do the things they love.
Well, Kat, I appreciate that. I'm not only going to ask questions, but I'm going to listen very intently with what you have to share today, because I'm hoping I'm one of those high agency individuals that can benefit from what we do in here today on the podcast. So thank you again for taking the time out to make this happen. So I do want to start out like with most of my guests. Was there a moment in life or in a circumstance that happened to you that you chose a career in health optimization?
I would say it was a general desire to improve myself and to take control of that aspect of my life. And I was in my 20s, and I always paid attention to nutrition, and I hadn't really jumped upon the bandwagon of training and those other aspects of health. And that was when I started to open up a second dimension to health optimization, so to speak. And then sleep came after that. Sleep actually came years after that, and which is a little bit of why I do what I do today, because I realized that I started optimizing or focusing on sleep later than I would have liked to. So hopefully by sharing a bit of my experience and what I know, I can help more people start focusing on their sleep and experiencing the benefit on their life sooner than I did that for myself.
Yeah. Yeah, we all go through evolutionary phases in what we do, and it sounds as though sleep was important. You probably wish you would have role reversed that, but that's great. And how you have taken maybe a shortcoming in yourself and you're trying to help people get over that faster and sooner. So that's great. Now, when we talked first about kind of our pre-call of doing on the podcast, I was very interested in something that you brought up, and I kind of brought it up at the very start here. And that question is poor sleep actually aging people faster?
Great question, Derek. So yeah, why is sleep important, and does poor sleep age us faster? A few points here, and faster aging is definitely in the mega list of reasons why sleep is important. First, there are the long-term stakes that don't show up in a normal day. The data here is fairly consistent. When researchers follow long-term short sleepers, they see patterns that point in the same direction. Faster epigenetic aging across several aging clocks, shorter telomeres, more insulin resistance, higher fasting glucose despite a healthy diet, higher baseline blood pressure, higher incidence of depression, BMI, and of course, what we are more familiar with, higher levels of Alzheimer's related proteins, beta amyloid in the brain, and increased incidence of dementia. And, this is, again, something I wish I knew 20 years ago. You can function at a high level day to day, feel great, still be running physiology in a way that accelerates aging and disease risk. The second point is if you've been on 5 to 6 hours for a long time, the body has already adapted to that baseline. What happens when we don't get enough sleep is that our stress hormones, adrenaline and cortisol, can compensate. They increase our alertness so you can still focus, get through meetings, make decisions, and even go to the gym. So that compensation ends up hiding the cost, right? It can feel like things are going great or fine on the surface because the stress hormones are doing their job. Last but not least, probably the most important thing of all, but difficult to quantify, is that it feels amazing to get excellent sleep 90 to 95% of the time. You can't really feel epigenetic aging or a small increase in baseline blood sugar levels, but you can feel the uplift in vitality, energy, in the outlook on life. And that difference is huge. When people end up prioritizing sleep and keeping that improvement over months, they often realize, I thought I was doing okay, but I had forgotten what it feels like to have a real stamina and a powerful brain. An extra 1 to 2 hours of sleep might not sound like much, but it really delivers an outsized return, regardless of whether you care more about day-to-day performance, memory, learning, or whether you care about your long-term risk for cardiovascular diseases, dementia, or general longevity. The brain, heart, metabolic health, and your future self who wants to wake up every day energized and engaged will all benefit from modest and consistent improvements in sleep.
Well, Kat, you're making me a little nervous in the 3 points that you bring up, because I'm going to have to listen to those over and over and make some changes. I won't give away the problems that I have, but I'm one of those people that is in that 5 or 6 hour range. And I think, I feel great. I know I don't, but I'm, at the ripe old age of 56 at the time of this recording, and I want to live a lot longer. So I think I have to make some changes. So in your 20s when you were getting smarter. Maybe I'll get smarter in my middle 50s. But thank you for sharing those 3 tips. Again, I'm gonna read back through those and listen through them multiple times. So you had mentioned this kind of before about you help people with that 3 a.m. wake up thing. So when somebody wakes in the middle of the night, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., with racing thoughts, their brain won't turn off and they really can't get back to sleep, is that poor sleep or is that stress? Or is there a combination of the two of them?
Yeah, the problem is when most of us hear the word stress, we default to psychosocial stressors, work, pressure, relationships, caregiving responsibilities, and these matter a lot. But there are at least 4 more elements to stress that may not immediately come to mind that affect sleep. First, physical stressors, fasting, cold exposure, intense exercise, chronic low energy intake, these trigger the same stress response as bad news or tight deadlines. Our brain and body don't separate emotional stress from physical stress the way we might think about them. The result is very similar: higher arousal, more nighttime alertness, and more wake-ups and more difficulty falling back asleep when woken up. Second, metabolic issues. With insulin resistance, you often see larger post-meal glucose spikes and then steeper drops, right? And these drops don't have to reach hypoglycemia to matter because the brain can interpret a fast downward glucose trend as a fuel threat and trigger counter-regulatory stress hormone release. Again, adrenaline and cortisol. And this can raise heart rate, increase alertness, and create the wired feeling. Higher visceral fat often accompanies metabolic issues. And visceral fat, as we might know, is metabolically active and tends to increase baseline inflammation. And that leads us to the third point: chronic low-grade inflammation, even from things that are not a formal diagnosis, even with inflammation markers that are technically within the normal range. For example, early subclinical fatty liver or ongoing gut irritation can activate the immune system. And gut issues can also exist without Crohn's or IBS or IBD. For example, frequent reflux, bloating, altered bowel patterns, or gut barrier irritation are enough to raise baseline inflammation. And because cortisol is anti-inflammatory, when inflammation rises, the body increases cortisol as a countermeasure. And then there's a fourth factor that often hides in plain sight: caffeine. We usually talk about caffeine as a sleep pressure issue that affects falling asleep because it blocks adenosine receptors, and that matters. But caffeine also interacts with the HPA stress axis. So if you still have caffeine circulating during sleep, it can keep you in a more activated state than you want, again, resulting in lighter sleep, easier wake-ups, and more difficulty falling back asleep. The thing is, caffeine metabolism varies widely between people and even from day to day for the same person. So there isn't a fixed cutoff time that works for everyone or even for the same person in different contexts. So going back to the question, is it just stress? An overactive sympathetic state in the middle of the sleep period is one of the big reasons people wake up at 2, 3, 4 a.m. or just in general too early and then can't return to sleep. But the stressors that affect sleep include more than work or responsibilities. It can include anything from physical stressors to inflammation to caffeine, plus how reactive your stress response is in the first place. And here's where midlife physiology becomes more relevant. Stress reactivity. How strongly your stress response activates from the same stimulus often changes across midlife because there is a hormonal component here. Both testosterone and estrogen influence HPA axis or stress axis reactivity. For some people, the same stress that used to be a non-event starts showing up in sleep as a brain that won't power down. So in some, it's not just stress. And by stress, it's also not just psychosocial or emotional stress. In the average, generally healthy individual, there are typically 3 core axes that affect sleep: autonomic tone as it relates to stress and stress reactivity, metabolic status, and circadian alignment. All of these affect each other as well and contribute to light, shallow sleep, even if someone can fall asleep fine, leading to 3 a.m. wake-ups and or short sleep and or generally unrestorative sleep, even if these disruptions are not yet enough to actually wake someone up.
That's a lot to take in. That's a lecture in itself. And if I think about what you were saying, there's a tremendous amount of functional medicine, of gut health, brain health, from the foods we eat, what we hear, what we see, that can be affecting our overall health. But you're saying it's not just how the functional medicine, the functional aspect of it is helping. You're saying functional medicine, along with poor sleeping patterns, can really offset us even more.
That's right. And I also want to dig into the aspect that, sleep physiology is very complicated, and there are things that disrupt healthy sleep physiology that are not on folks' radars. Going back to the physical stressors and inflammation and gut health, all of these affect how the brain regulates itself when it comes to sleep and how the stress axis reacts. And in turn, when the stress axis reacts, it affects our ability to sleep and sleep deeply and be able to fall back asleep when we do wake up.
Kind of this question I want to ask Kat in regards to maybe sleep apnea, but there's many people, that have struggled staying asleep for years, and they end up ruling out sleep apnea. Their doctors do that, hopefully, or they themselves think that they have. They've ordered some labs thinking, okay, this functional medicine kick that's taking place on there, maybe testosterone issues in men, estrogen and progesterone issues in women, but they say normal, but they still aren't sleeping well. Why does this happen, and what might be going on with these people?
Yeah, that's a great question, Derek. I've seen 2 generally healthy people of the same age with the same testosterone or estrogen levels have very different sleep. I've also seen individuals with lower baseline hormone levels sleep better than someone with higher levels. And I've seen many healthy 60-year-olds sleep better than 40-year-olds. So it can be a bit of an apples and oranges comparison, depending on what you're looking at. But it gives you an idea of how multifactorial sleep is, and that age is such a small aspect, if at all, in the generally healthy individual. So this is a common scenario, right? Someone rules out sleep apnea. They get hormone labs that come back normal and they still can't sleep. Here's one way to understand this. Labs are a snapshot of what is circulating in the blood. But what is circulating in the blood isn't what's acting at the tissue level. A hormone's physiological effects depends on the full sequence, and that sequence begins in the brain. So first, the brain sends timed instructions through the pituitary to the testes or ovaries, telling them when to make more hormone and when to make less. Next, the ovaries or testes have to be able to produce the hormone in response to that instruction. After that, the hormone has to travel through the bloodstream. Some of it is bound to carrier proteins and some of it is free. The free portion is the part that is more available to act on tissues. Then the hormone has to interact with its receptors. That is where tissue and receptor responsiveness comes in. Now, even if hormone levels look adequate on paper, tissues may not respond well if receptor sensitivity is reduced. Now, after the hormone has done its job, it also has to be metabolized and removed appropriately, right? If hormone production, transport, receptor response, or clearance are off, the overall hormonal effect can change. And across all of this, hormones also feed back to the brain, which helps the brain adjust future output. So if any part of this chain is not running as well as intended, the overall function, hormone function, can be compromised. So the result is labs look normal and sleep can still be unstable because the circulating levels are only one part of the picture. In other words, you have to have hormones circulating, but it is an insufficient condition for the hormone action that ultimately impacts your sleep, mood, and other effects of that hormone. Mechanistically, testosterone and estrogen both support metabolic stability by improving insulin sensitivity and muscle glucose uptake. Now, when that support is weaker, larger overnight glucose swings and compensatory stress axis activation, as we discussed earlier, can make sleep lighter and easier to disrupt. And for many people in midlife, there's again the added variable, stress reactivity, as I mentioned earlier, right? How strongly your stress response ramps up into the same stimulus changes in midlife, because both testosterone and estrogen tend to buffer stress axis reactivity, and that can change. That change can show up as more racing thoughts in the middle of the night. Also relevant to sleep, there's also the circadian element. Both hormones have receptors in the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the SCN, or you may know it as the body's master clock, which means reproductive hormones can also influence circadian rhythm. So reproductive hormones affect sleep through all three axes: autonomic tone or stress reactivity, metabolic stability, and circadian rhythm. And by the way, in the work, I've found that there are 5 patterns that come up again and again in 3 a.m. wake-ups, from metabolic to hormonal to circadian timing. I do have a tool called the 3 a.m. decoder, where you answer a few questions about your sleep and it maps which of those patterns fit your personal experience, including whether more than one is involved. It'll be on my website, and it will also be in the show notes, Derek. So it's free and it takes about 2 minutes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's very interesting. I'll probably dive into it myself, Kat. This raises a question for me. So I would assume when you bring on a client that you're working with that you're doing blood testing with them. I would assume that's part of your consultation and work.
Yes. Yeah, either that or they will already have blood tests taken.
Okay. And then if you work with them over time, you're reanalyzing how their patterns have gotten better from, gut issues potentially, and or how their sleep patterns have improved.
Yes.
Fantastic. Okay, wonderful. So I was on one of your YouTube videos. It raised a question, and that's what I think you mentioned a little bit. It's about sleep hygiene. That's not everything. Sleep hygiene, just because we have it doesn't mean it's enough. Can you give us a little bit more detail on the importance of sleep hygiene?
Yeah, sleep hygiene is important, but sleep hygiene alone is not enough to solve everyone's sleep problems, because not all sleep problems are caused by poor sleep hygiene. There are multiple possible causes of disrupted sleep, and good sleep hygiene can solve your sleep problems if your sleep problems were only caused by poor sleep hygiene. Sounds circular, but if you think about it, it makes complete sense, right? But in most people with long-standing sleep problems, the causes of their sleep issues usually extend beyond poor sleep hygiene. So let me give you a couple of examples. First, no screens or devices at the end of the day. So yes, evening blue light can suppress melatonin release, delay melatonin release, and generally push circadian timing in an unhelpful direction. That is sound physiology, but it is also incomplete at the same time, because if someone's bottleneck is not having enough ingredients, for example, the tryptophan or the cofactors and enzymes involved in melatonin synthesis or production, removing the blue light won't fix that, right? Because removing a negative doesn't supply a positive. I'm not saying that light hygiene is a bad idea. I'm saying it does not address the full chain of issues for everyone. Second, magnesium. Magnesium supports calming physiology and is involved in hundreds of reactions in the body. And if someone is low, repletion can help sleep. But if someone isn't low, more magnesium doesn't create better sleep. Magnesium also doesn't solve sleep problems unrelated to magnesium in the first place. Studies suggest the benefit of supplementation tops out once deficiency isn't present. So again, magnesium can be relevant, but it's not a universal solution for solving all sleep problems. The third example is going back to chronic low-grade inflammation, as we discussed earlier. Inflammation can increase cortisol output and raise someone's baseline stress levels. So again, that translates into easier awakenings, more difficulty falling back asleep if woken up, or generally light, unrefreshing sleep if the person doesn't wake up. So in this case, you can see that to resolve this, the most direct path is to address the conditions that are contributing to the low-grade inflammation. And we can see why breathing exercises or a cooling mattress or some other sleep hygiene strategy or gadget might struggle to be effective here. And melatonin is a big one that is widely misunderstood. In my work, I actually rarely recommend starting melatonin because so few people are actually deficient in a way that they cannot physiologically produce melatonin under any circumstance. It is also a bit of a myth that older adults must produce less melatonin. It is usually a situation where someone is already taking it, and I am helping them figure out whether melatonin is the cause of their sleep issue or not. Because if it's not their issue, taking melatonin may actually disrupt their sleep. So if someone's taking high-dose melatonin for a long time, we first need to either figure out whether melatonin deficiency was the cause of their sleep problems, and if not, actually remove the melatonin supplementation as an early stage of addressing their sleep problems. The issue here is also that many individuals are taking melatonin at the wrong time for their biology. And everyone varies in when their body expects melatonin. That is in chronobiology called dim light melatonin onset. And the complexity here is that people's dim light melatonin onset time varies widely, even for the same target sleep time. So the usual take melatonin 30 to 60 minutes before bedtime is actually very often unhelpful. So in that sense, it's hard for someone to see whether melatonin was actually effective in addressing a true deficiency that was the sole cause of their sleep issues. And here's another important point. Melatonin is much more relevant for falling asleep and adjusting circadian timing. Jet lag is a classic example. It's often not that helpful for reducing wake after sleep onset, meaning staying asleep. More often than not, I end up helping people ultimately come off melatonin once they see that it isn't helping their sleep issue. And then we move on to finding what's causing their sleep problems. Because if melatonin is affecting someone's sleep, we can't get a clean baseline. So going back to the original question, when someone says, I've done all the sleep hygiene strategies, it usually is the case that sleep hygiene helped a bit, but not completely, because they've addressed some of the obstacles with sleep hygiene, but not all. So a lot of the time, if the issue is staying asleep, early wake-ups, short sleep, and or alertness that feels out of proportion, then we're usually looking at sleep physiology that is unaffected by classic sleep hygiene strategies.
Yeah. Kat, every one of your answers is a masterclass in the information that people need to learn about sleep hygiene or functional medicine and sleep or sleep apnea issues. I'm sure which you could probably go into a tremendous amount about that because those machines probably do their work. I can't understand why somebody would insert something into themselves other than they're at a true risk of cardiac issues with that. But I think this goes to a point of there's so much information that there's out there on what is right or wrong, but there's got to be a lot of misconceptions that people have about sleep and how poor sleep really does affect their overall health. What would your suggestion that somebody says, oh, my overall sleep it's fine to get 4 or 5 hours of sleep, I feel great. What's that misconception that they're really missing? What's the most important thing they're missing about it?
Yeah, a lot of people adapt to 5 to 6 hours of sleep, including myself for years and years, and they still train, make decisions and manage their life very well. That doesn't mean the pattern is neutral, right? As I mentioned very briefly at the beginning, it means the body has adapted by compensating with stress hormones. And it's why we feel great after we jump into a cold shower or an ice bath, because when we come out, our body has supplied us with adrenaline, and that often gives that alert, energized feeling. And when we don't get enough sleep, the body ends up compensating with stress hormones. So here are 3 practical takeaways, right, for you if you're struggling with 3 a.m. wake-ups, short sleep, or unrestorative sleep. Derek, did you want to ask that question, or did you want me to go into the tips?
No, I'll ask that question, but what I would like to hear from you is, can you provide me like a success story of a client that you've worked with that has had problems, they've begun to work with you, and what they've gotten from a result of working with you for better health overall?
Yeah, I had a client, well, the story starts with me getting them to come off melatonin very gradually. The person was waking up between 2, 3, 4 a.m. with no clear reasons. And this person did not have apnea and they're generally healthy. What I did was I adjusted their daytime activity And we also looked at their inflammation levels, made some adjustment to what they were eating that was contributing to that inflammation. We got their inflammation levels down. And over the course of, I would say, 3 to 6 months, they went from waking up for no reason between 2 to 4 a.m. They started waking up later, right? It became 5 a.m. It became 6 a.m. And a year later, now they don't wake up in the middle of the night anymore. And when they get disrupted, for example, they told me a story of their neighborhood trash man would come and collect the trash around 5, 6 a.m. and it would be very, very loud and it would always wake him up. But now it still wakes him up, but he goes back to sleep immediately and sleeps for another 1 or 2 hours until 7:30 when he normally wakes up. So that is what I call the difference between sleep that is light, shallow, unrefreshing, and you're waking up for no clear reason, to you can't sleep through something very disruptive, but after that you go back to sleep because your baseline stress access is well regulated. And that really requires looking at the physiology from a comprehensive standpoint, whether that's autonomic or hormonal or inflammatory or metabolic or some combination of the above. And that is typically what that takes. And you can usually see by someone's sleep pattern, for example, when their sleep disruptions started. Was it months ago? Was it 5 years ago? Was it 10 years ago? What change prompted that? Was it starting in mid-age? Was it starting in their 30s? Was it starting in their 50s? These all provide clues as to which of those aspects, the core axes, autonomic, metabolic, hormonal, circadian, inflammatory, it can provide clues into which ones of those are involved. And that's kind of what's behind the 3 a.m. decoder. That helps people figure out which ones of those axes are involved based on their sleep pattern.
Yeah. I can't wait to learn more about the 3 a.m. decoder. Like, just for a few minutes to learn about something can help. I think that's fantastic. But what an amazing success story that you share, that somebody's struggling in sleep and then the garbage man comes by, wakes them up, but no longer they can go back to sleep. That would be a nice situation. Or moving to a different home or talking to the garbage man and not come at the time would be a situation itself as well. But I'd like to ask you, Kat, in regards to your business itself, what's the vision that you see for your business in the next 3 to 5 years?
I want to help more and more people with their sleep and experience sort of life-changing sleep, being able to sleep excellent 90 to 95% of the time, and experience the uplift and vitality and energy that comes with that. I want to abolish the misconception that worse sleep is a requirement of aging. Worse sleep is not a requirement of aging. There are 60 and 70-year-olds that sleep very, very well. I really want to eliminate that myth everywhere if I could.
I just thinking about that, of a grandpa and grandma, the 60 or 70-year-old that is struggling with that sleep pattern, and for them to think that there are options to improve, which is what you offer. So I think that's fantastic. And I'm sure that the more people learn about you and that would work with you are going to realize that, hey, I can talk to my parents about this. I can talk to my grandparents about that and give them some help. Of course, we hope they refer you the business, but that would be a great way to share that. I'll share all of your links on the 3 a.m. decoder, but if someone is interested in learning more about you and what you can do for them, Kat, where would you like to send?
My website is thelongevityvault.com, and there you can access the 3 a.m. decoder and my articles. My YouTube is at the Kat Fu, and those would be very great resources for tips on looking at sleep from a broader, more comprehensive view in addition to the sleep hygiene strategies that most people are already doing.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I promise you we'll add them all into the descriptions as we said. And the last question I do want to ask, I know you've got some tips for our viewers and listeners, which I think is important, but who's listened to this so far, they know there's a tremendous amount of value, but they're not certain on where they should start to improve their sleep. I'd love for you to share that with us.
Yeah, I would love to give you your audience three practical takeaways for individuals who are struggling with 3 a.m. wake-ups, short sleep, or generally unrestorative sleep. The first practical place to start, caffeine. You don't necessarily need to cut it out, but you can start by tightening the experiment. Reduce the dose or move the cutoff earlier and earlier again. And do each step for 7 to 14 days and see whether your wake-up patterns change. Because, and as I alluded to earlier, caffeine clearance varies so much. There's genetics, there's absorption dynamics at the gut level, there's overall liver health and medication load on top of genetics. So you are aiming to look for your personal dose and cutoff, not a universal 11 a.m. or 2 p.m., for example. I would say, though, what I actually do with clients who have most of their foundationals in place is actually a caffeine holiday for a period of time so we can isolate that effect while we're doing deeper work. Because if caffeine is affecting someone's sleep, it's going to keep disrupting sleep even if someone has addressed all the other factors. And as we mentioned earlier, caffeine doesn't just affect adenosine or how fast you fall asleep. Again, it interacts with the stress axis and can affect sleep depth and interfere with the quality of different sleep stages and contribute to overall unrefreshing sleep, even if someone can fall asleep and doesn't fully wake up. So once you isolate that and see the effect of caffeine on your own sleep, you can then make an informed decision going forward on what trade-off you want. A second takeaway, start with the sleep pattern, not the wearable. The pattern often points to direction because I fall asleep fine, but wake wired at 3 points to a different set of underlying causes. Then I can't fall asleep for 2 hours, and it informs you on the potential solutions. Racing thoughts plus mid-sleep waking is often a sign of elevated arousal in that window of sleep. So let the sleep pattern changes to someone's sleep pattern over not just days, weeks, but months, years, and decades help inform the path to better sleep. The final guiding idea, remember that the body has multiple sources of stressors: psychosocial, physical, metabolic, inflammatory, and stimulant driven. That means caffeine and, again, any other compounds that interact with the nervous system, and that includes cholinergics, anticholinergics, some adaptogens, for instance. So hopefully this helps broaden your lens on sleep, because sleep hygiene strategies are useful but inherently incomplete in that they don't address every type of sleep disruptive physiology. Often we think we've tried everything for sleep, but we haven't. And that's actually great and actionable news.
Yeah. Well, Kat, this has been a fantastic podcast with you. The amount of knowledge that you have about this to help our sleep. But what I'm getting from this is once you start to improve your sleep, much more of your functional side of your body is going to improve, from mental, physical, psychosocial, all of those components. So if there are people that are listening to this, our viewers, our listeners, if you found one thing that's been valuable, and there's more than one thing that she's given us a tremendous amount of insight and tips on this, we ask that you share it to another person, whether it's sharing a link or talking to them about it, because it's important. If we can help one person get better with their sleep problems or sleep patterns or sleep hygiene, for what Kat has introduced it today, I think it's extremely important that we do that. Share it with somebody that can take the benefit. So just have your ear open and ready when you're in a conversation with somebody and when you're like, I remember what Kat Fu said on that podcast. I need to share this with them. So we would ask you that you do that. From a personal perspective, we'd love it if you'd subscribe to the Prime Health Podcast. We think it's very good. We've got some amazing guests like Kat, and we just want you to share that as well. So until next time, remember that true wellness is a journey we are all on together. Now, whether you're taking charge of your own health or guiding others on theirs, every step forward matters. So please do stay committed to your Prime Health journey. And again, Kat, thank you very much for being an amazing guest here on the Prime Health Podcast.
Thank you, Derek, for having me. It was an excellent conversation.